Judge Alexander Hayes knew something was wrong when he saw the officer's eyes follow him across the courthouse parking lot. Years of experience on the bench had taught him to read people, and the predatory glint in their gaze made his stomach tighten. Still, he refused to quicken his pace or show fear. That's exactly what they wanted. Another riveting case from new real-life stories unfolds in Silver Ridge, where a respected judge's ordinary morning turned into a defining moment for justice. Our narrator begins. What these officers didn't realize was that their next suspicious person would be signing their suspension papers within 24 hours. Standing there in his tailored suit, briefcase in hand, Alexander faced a choice that would echo through the community: submit to the humiliation of a baseless arrest or resist and risk escalation. He chose dignity, letting them cuff him while silently noting every procedural violation. Little did officers Miller and Carter know their target wasn't just any well-dressed black man. He was the judge scheduled to hear their department's cases the very next morning. This story of power, prejudice, and poetic justice captured the nation's attention. But what happened after those cuffs clicked shut would shake the foundations of law enforcement in Silver Ridge forever. Inside the holding cell, Judge Alexander Hayes smoothed his silk tie, a habit from 15 years on the bench that now felt like a quiet act of defiance. The iron bars created harsh shadows across his face as Officer Miller sauntered past, keys jingling with deliberate slowness. The precinct's fluorescent lights cast everything in a sickly pallor. But Alexander refused to let his shoulders slump. Getting comfortable in there. Big shot. Miller's smirk carried years of unchecked authority. Bet you're not feeling so important now in that fancy suit of yours. Alexander met his gaze steadily, mind racing beneath his composed exterior. Every taunt, every procedural violation, every moment of this ordeal was etching itself into his memory, not as a victim, but as someone who finally witnessed firsthand what countless others had endured in these same cells under these same contemptuous stares. I know my rights, Alexander stated calmly, watching Miller's expression darken at his refusal to be intimidated. And I know precisely which regulations you've broken since the moment you approached my car without cause. Officer Carter joined his partner, both men radiating the false confidence of those who'd never faced real consequences. Regulations? Carter scoffed. Listen to him. Miller. Guess spending time in expensive suits makes someone think they know the law better than those who enforce it. The irony would have been amusing if it wasn't so telling. Alexander observed their casual cruelty, their assumption of impunity. Each moment reinforced what he'd long suspected from his years behind the bench. The system needed more than gradual reform. It needed a complete reckoning. Outside, social media exploded with eyewitness videos. T.O. Story's local correspondent was already piecing together the footage. A distinguished black man in handcuffs, maintaining his dignity while being roughly handled by officers. The images struck a chord that resonated far beyond Silver Ridge. But inside these walls, Alexander was still just another suspicious person to these officers. Another chance to flex their authority without consequence. 6 hours, Alexander announced quietly, breaking the tense silence of the holding area. That's how long you've held me without charges, without a phone call, without due process. His voice remained level, but carried an undertone of steel that made both officers pause their casual conversation. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., I expect we'll have an interesting discussion about this violation of basic rights. Miller advanced toward the cell, attempting to tower over his seated prisoner. Is that some kind of threat from behind those bars? No, Officer Miller, Alexander replied, his voice unflinching. That's simply a fact. You see, I'm due in court tomorrow morning. Alexander stood slowly, his full height and presence filling the small cell. As the presiding judge over departmental review cases, the color drained from both officers' faces as reality crashed through their wall of prejudice. A frantic database search by the sergeant only confirmed what Alexander had known all along. They'd handcuffed the very man who would be reviewing their department's conduct mere hours later. The next morning, the courtroom crackled with an electricity that made even veteran officers nervous. Community members packed the gallery, many holding signs demanding accountability. Journalists clutched notepads, eager to capture every moment of this unprecedented scene. But all eyes fixed on the figure entering in judicial robes, the same man who'd spent the previous night behind bars. Alexander ascended to the bench with measured steps. The same quiet authority he displayed during his arrest now amplified by his official position. Looking down at Officers Miller and Carter, he saw not just two men, but the embodiment of a systemic failure that had plagued his community for generations. This court has reviewed extensive evidence of yesterday's incident. Alexander began, his voice filling the hushed chamber, including multiple video recordings, witness statements, and your own incomplete arrest report that conveniently omits several key interactions. The officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Their earlier bravado evaporated under the harsh light of accountability. Every attempt to justify their actions only highlighted the baseless nature of their assumptions and the deep-rooted prejudices that guided them. You operated on a series of dangerous assumptions. Alexander continued, his words measured and clear. You assumed that a well-dressed black man near City Hall must be suspicious. You assumed that questioning your authority justified an immediate arrest. Most tellingly, you assumed there would be no consequences for these actions. He paused, letting the weight of each word settle across the courtroom. Today, we begin the process of correcting those assumptions. As he delivered his ruling, immediate suspension without pay pending a full investigation into patterns of discriminatory behavior, Alexander recognized this moment as more than personal vindication. It was an opportunity to transform an injustice into institutional change, to use his position to ensure others wouldn't face similar treatment. In the weeks that followed, Alexander leveraged his position and newfound public platform to implement sweeping reforms. Mandatory bias training, community oversight boards, and transparent disciplinary procedures became his legacy. The very officers who tried to humiliate him unknowingly sparked changes that would reshape law enforcement in Silver Ridge. Through it all, Alexander maintained the same composed demeanor that had so unsettled his arresting officers. But now, that composure carried a new purpose, proving that justice, when properly served, could transform even its greatest obstacles into stepping stones toward progress. The story spread far beyond Silver Ridge, featured prominently on new real-life stories as a testament to how one moment of injustice, faced with dignity and answered with determination, could catalyze long-overdue change. Alexander's address to the Police Academy's first reformed graduating class became a viral moment. True justice isn't just about punishing wrongdoing. It's about creating a system where such wrongs become unthinkable. You stand here not just as officers of the law, but as guardians of that vision. His words echoed through social media and news coverage, touching hearts and minds far beyond the courtroom where his ordeal began. The transformation of Silver Ridge's police force became a model for departments nationwide, proving that change was possible when courage met opportunity and dignity faced down prejudice. For Alexander, the most powerful moment came months later when a young black lawyer approached him after court. "Your Honor," she said, eyes bright with purpose. "Watching you turn that injustice into reform showed me that change is possible. That's why I chose this profession." Alexander smiled, knowing that the ripples of that one fateful morning would continue touching lives long after the headlines faded. 6 months after that pivotal arrest, Judge Alexander Hayes stood at his chamber window, watching new police recruits file into the academy. Each wore a badge redesigned with his words, "Justice serves all." The sight stirred memories of cold metal cuffs and Miller's sneering face. But now those memories fueled purpose rather than pain. His phone buzzed, another department requesting guidance on implementing the Silver Ridge model of police reform. The changes he'd sparked had rippled far beyond their small city, touching communities he'd never even visited. "Your Honor," his clerk appeared at the door. "There's a young man here who said he was inspired by your story to become a public defender." Alexander smiled, straightening his signature tie. Some battles change more than just the fighters. They transform the very ground they're fought on.